Since the dawn of humanity, we've been recording this podcast. Not exactly in chronological order, but it still counts. Welcome to Vaguely Scientific. Here is where I typically throw in some obscure reference that nobody will get. I am Derek. And my co-host Jim typically responds with some witty retort I don't expect. Let's see if he does it this time. Hi, Jim.
You are Derek.
That was good. Oh. We last left our guest this week cleaning up a bit of a mess regarding our numeral system, and fortunately she's back and mostly unharmed. Welcome back, Anne.
Pre-hominids are so amusingly violent.
You're 100% less on fire than the last time I saw you.
You know, 100 is a stretch.
There might be a little fire.
Yeah.
Well, welcome back to the show where we endeavor to answer some of the strangest audience-submitted questions in a vaguely scientific manner. But before we do that, Jim's gonna tell us the fun science fact of the day. Jim?
Okay. The vermilion border is the border between the normal skin on your face and the skin of your lips. Injury to the vermilion border can misalign the color of your lips and skin interface and be surprisingly noticeable.
I always wondered about that.
Yeah, I learned that because my son fell and needed stitches, so he didn't have a problem there.
Oh.
Yeah, he bit his lip, and it was like right on the vermilion border, which is how I found out what it's called. And they said, you should probably get like a stitch or two just to make sure it heals good. So it did heal good, by the way.
Glad he's okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, he was fine. He barely even cared, but the doctor was like, yeah, because of the thing with the vermilion border, you should probably get it sewn up. And it's like, okay.
Well, without further ado, we should probably move on to question 1 this week. And question 1 this week is, what process, similar to the idea of carbon dating, could we use to tell the age of a person who traveled forward in time? For example, if a person born in 1922 lived until they were 20, and then suddenly ended up in modern day, would we say that person is 100 years old?
I think that it's on the time traveler to responsibly figure out how many days pass, like, in their life. Like, once you become a time traveler, they should give you a special watch that's like, all right, you are this many days old now, or this many years old, or whatever. Because I don't think that you would say that a 20-year-old that has traveled into the future would be 100 years old. I mean, I think that's ridiculous.
So, for this question, it kind of depends on the type of time travel, because if somebody just poofed out of existence in the 20s,
yeah,
and then showed up here, I would say absolutely not, because their body didn't age, right? Like, it's the exact same body they left the 20s with.
Right, yeah.
But how would we apply that to something like a Captain America situation where the body is in existence for all those years, but just preserved?
Yeah.
So those are two different types of time traveling,
yeah.
I think?
Absolutely.
Captain America, I think you would say, is 100 years old.
Well, so that's kind of a point I was going to bring up. And the first thing that I looked up, because I just wasn't actually sure of this, is how carbon dating actually works. And so a very simple explanation of it here is all living things absorb carbon from the atmosphere and the food sources that they eat, including a certain amount of natural radioactive carbon-14. And when plants or animals die, they stop absorbing carbon-14, but the radioactive carbon that they've accumulated continues to decay. So basically, you measure the amount of carbon-14 that is left, and you can tell when something has died. And it goes further into this because this process originally assumed that the amount of carbon-14 in the atmosphere was always the same, and it wasn't.
Oh.
So it's been amended like multiple times. But that kind of, if somebody's still alive, I'm sure there's something you can learn from like a time travel, like if they've absorbed different amounts of chemicals that might have been in the atmosphere when at their original time.
Yeah.
So on that note, in terms of absorbing things, the first part of the question where it was like, what light carbon dating could we prove they came from the past? And my immediate thought was, how much microplastics do they have in them?
That's actually not a bad one, yeah.
Because if they don't have any microplastics, it's not from now.
It's not from now. Okay.
I was thinking about how I think other countries do this as well, although I can't say for sure. I didn't look into that. But we go around and we try to collect as much pre-atom bomb steel as we can.
Ooh.
Because I guess that there is, like post-atom bomb, the radiation and particulates from various atomic tests have accumulated in our atmosphere, and I don't know what they do to the steel, but I guess that steel was better before there was atom bombs being detonated. Uh-huh. So we go around and recycle old steel from like old warships and stuff. I should have looked into that. I didn't really think about it until right this minute. I'm gonna have to see why that's important.
Well, the example of Captain America specifically, because I thought about organisms being put in stasis.
Oh, sorry. I wanna throw this in there because I find it interesting. So the reason we look for it's called low background steel. It is, like I said, steel that is sourced from the pre-nuclear age, and we use it for like particle detectors and things that are designed to detect radiation, because there is now enough background radiation in modern steel that becomes a problem. Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's fine. Well, the example of Captain America specifically is interesting because this is an organism that didn't just suddenly shoot forward in the future. This is an organism that existed, all that time, but just wasn't conscious and
basically cryogenically frozen.
Cryogenically frozen. So, cells can go into stasis. That's the presentation, it's science fiction still at this point, but the idea is that they freeze it and it just like halts. So if we can't measure something like how close the cells are to cell death, functionally he's the same age that he was when he get frozen, but would he still be absorbing any sort of chemicals during his cryogenic stasis?
Was Captain America exposed to radiation?
Well, depends on the origin story, but like he possibly was exposed to quite a bit.
He went into stasis theoretically before the atom bomb and the much more powerful like hydrogen bombs and things. Point. So like would his body existing in the world have like low levels of other types of radiation on him to prove he was there through it? Though granted, where he crashed, maybe not, but like...
Fair. I also wonder if Captain America... I mean, I guess the question isn't about specifically Captain America, but I just now thought like he would have gotten sick real quick when I guess his immune system is super soldiered.
Oh, good point. I would think that he being encased in ice, and I guess presumably his metabolism dropped to zero, I would think he would not be absorbing new particles. And actually, looping back around to the carbon-14 thing, I think that he probably, the amount of carbon-14 in his body would decrease as he, hangs out in there in his glacier.
I mean, that's how, if you're not absorbing more, it eventually decomposes, and that's how they tell how long something's been dead. So he might actually appear...
Well, once he came back out of it, I think it would probably go back up.
It'd go back up. So you could tell that he had less, but not necessarily... You wouldn't have a control to compare that against.
Right. If they carbon dated him as soon as they found him, they probably could tell how long he was in the glacier.
Oh.
You could also, though... You mentioned he'd get sick as soon as he came out.
Yeah, I forgot that his immune system was great, though.
Right, but I'm thinking, if somebody who wasn't Captain America... And again, this is more towards the first part of the question, but something else you could also test for, not only like what vaccines do they have in their body, but like what types of diseases would they have any kind of like antibodies or exposure to, specifically kind of like extinct diseases.
Oh, yeah.
Because like a lot
enough.
of us would not have been exposed to like a polio virus in our lifetimes.
Right.
But he would have.
Yeah.
Or somebody from his time would have. So that could potentially be a way of like, okay, what have you experienced that
smallpox
kind of isn't
vaccine.
around?
So if we're ever invaded by people from the past, then we can War of the Worlds them.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of. Or even like, I mean, if we're going really far back in the past, because we can do this with, we've done it with like Egyptian mummies to see like what they ate, what remnants in their teeth. So you could feasibly be like, okay, what extinct strains of grain do you have in your stomach and have eaten recently that don't exist anymore? So you had to have come from a time, or animals,
or less delicately from their poop,
right?
Yeah.
But like you'd have to get that, like you'd have to wait a minute for that.
Yeah. The thing that I sort of was thinking about a lot with this question was the sort of like, how would you tell how old somebody was if they time traveled? Like if I was thinking of it as like the blip thing where you like leave 1932 and show up in 2018.
Right.
And so
they're as old as they were when they left. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like I just
well, so I was thinking for whatever reason I really got hung up on like if they stopped keeping track of their prior age and they just kind of like came up with a number. But I was looking a lot into basically what they say is like a biological age, and I determined that basically everybody's biological age is different, and there's not really a good way to calculate it without knowing your actual age.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a couple things I was looking at, there was like telomere length, which varies from person to person. A lot of various like disease markers that would be like when do certain diseases onset in you if you have like an Alzheimer's or Huntington's disease, something that would onset later in life, and that happens to different people at different times as well. So there's not really a good way to calculate that.
Well, wouldn't you run into the problem too? Is that a lot of, if you're talking about biological age, wouldn't you have to take into account knowing the conditions they came from?
Yeah,
because
that's
like,
also true.
If they're coming from a very, very far back time, life conditions are harder, and somebody who is maybe only in their 20s then is going to read to us because of like the damage or how worn down their teeth are and all these other things are going to appear like in their 40s.
Mm-hmm.
So when I first read this question, it reminded me of a dumb short story that I wrote in college about a group of superheroes, and one of them was from the future. And when I introduced the character, I said I found the quote that I wrote, but it doesn't matter because this is an unpublished short story that I wrote.
Yeah.
So the character is sitting in a bar, and one could argue that he was underage, considering that he would not actually be born for several hundred years. But according to carbon dating and his driver's license, he was 21 and he could sit wherever he felt like sitting. Mm-hmm. But the reason that I kind of bring that up is, while there isn't really a way to determine the exact age of a person, there aren't really a lot of reasons that we would need to.
Yeah.
Once you get to a certain age, like adulthood or something, like you basically just say that's a teenager, that's an adolescent, that's an adult.
Yeah. And you can kind of determine like, oh, that person's probably in their 20s or 30s or 40s or whatever.
Right.
Sometimes it's hard to tell. Sometimes you got the guy from the inversion table commercial who's like 80 and he's ripped and looks like a 50-year-old, but...
See, I just realized that I apparently read this question differently than both of you, because at no point did I wonder if someone came to the future, how would we tell if they were like 21 years old? My thought would be like, if someone came to the future and like lost their memory, how would we find out what year they came from?
Oh, that is one of the ways that I read it. I tried to explore it in as many ways as possible, and that was a more silly one.
I mean, that's fair. I was just sitting here like, oh yeah, I have absolutely nothing to contribute to this, because like, it never occurred to me that they wouldn't just know how old they were, and you could be like, hi stranger, how old are you? And they'd be like 15, and you'd be like, great.
I always liked in the Doctor Who episode with the Weeping Angels, Blink, the first one, where the one lady gets zapped back in time, and the main character of that episode goes and visits her grave, and she's like, "You told them you were in your 20s, you lying cow." And I just like the expression lying cow for starters. But also,
Yeah.
like, I guess there's no reason not to lie about your age if you get zapped somewhere another time or place and just be like, oh yeah, I'm 23 and you're actually like 40.
Well, that's kind of I watch a lot of or I guess there aren't a lot out there anymore, but I always like the idea of a character who's like hundreds of years old but like somehow doesn't age.
Mhm.
There have been several sci-fi shows with that premise before,
Yeah.
but I
Like
always
Doctor Who.
Doctor Who's one of them. There was one called New Amsterdam that I remember being neat. That always kind of, or that kind of fits into this question a little bit in that, I guess closer to the idea that it doesn't really matter. Like, if you're several hundred years old, you don't need to know. I am specifically 1,302 years old this Thursday.
Yeah.
Like, eventually you're going to stop caring.
Well, there's also the point too that depending on what time they came from, they also might not know accurately.
That's true.
True.
Yeah.
Because if you were somebody, if like you were a kid born during like the Black Death, where they didn't really keep track of,
Oh,
they didn't
yeah.
keep track of when kids were born. They kept track of when they were christened because they assumed most of them would die before then anyway.
Right.
But also, like, if you survived and your parents died, you don't know when your birthday is.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So, like, they might not even also be able to give you an accurate answer
Right.
in that as even a baseline, whether or not they're lying about it.
Right.
Or, if we go real far back before, like, any sense of real timekeeping.
Right. or even just if you go to a time where if there's a different calendar system, like even if you just went back far enough that we're suddenly on the Julian calendar again, that's still going to throw you off a little bit.
That's the thing that always like kind of boggles my mind, because our current calendar is pretty old at this point, but there are times when it'll come up that like, this is this historical figure's birthday, and I'll be like, is it really? Because like I feel like it doesn't necessarily line up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not really sure exactly how they calculate that, but either they're guessing or they have some kind of like specific record and they can sync up the calendar. Because I think you can sync up the Julian calendar pretty well. Well, I have great news for everyone, especially me. It is that time again. It is time for the old Ig Nobel Prizes. Every year, the Ig Nobel Council comes down from the mountaintops and gathers in a place, maybe. I don't know how this works. Point is, the Ig Nobel Prizes are given to researchers and research teams for research projects that just sound ridiculous. They may have something useful going on in them, but we don't care about what the paper actually says. We only care about the ridiculousness of the title and some of the methodology, especially methodology, actually. There's a lot of ridiculous methodology out there today. But I like to talk about the winners of the Ig Nobel Prize, and we got some great ones this year. Let me tell you. We're going to start right here at the top of the old list here with the Applied Cardiology Prize.
I'm already laughing just because it's applied cardiology.
Yeah. This goes to Eliska Prochaskova et al. For seeking and finding evidence that when new romantic partners meet for the first time and feel attracted to each other, their heart rates synchronize.
That seeking and weird. Finding evidence.
Yeah.
That is quite weird.
It's interesting, though. I think it's fascinating that happens. Next up, we have the Literature Prize, and this is for Eric Martinez, Francis Malika, and Edward Gibson for analyzing what makes legal documents unnecessarily difficult to understand.
It's by design most of the time, I assume.
Almost certainly. Next up is our Biology Prize, and this is for Solimary Garcia Hernandez and Glauco Machado for studying whether and how constipation affects the mating prospect of scorpions.
Okay.
I didn't read any of these actual papers, so I've got nothing. I just report the facts, and that's up for you to decide out there, fair listeners. So. Medicine Prize goes to Marcin Jasinski et al. For showing that when patients undergo some form of toxic chemotherapy, they suffer fewer harmful side effects when ice cream replaces one traditional component of the procedure.
They suffer fewer harmful side effects when ice cream replaces one which
I don't know. I
which
didn't look.
parts?
That's the
Which
beauty.
components?
I'm never going to look.
Some of them are important.
I'm going to live in that world where it's just, I assume that they replace, like, I don't know, the saline drip or something.
This is a little bit like, are people happier when they have ice cream? Turns out, yes.
The engineering prize goes to Gen Matsuzaki et al. For trying to discover the most efficient way for people to use their fingers when turning a knob.
You just got to feel it.
I like that people have been given grants for these kinds of experiments. It's my favorite part of the Ig Nobel Prize. The Art History Prize goes to Peter de Smet and Nicholas Helmuth for their study, a multidisciplinary approach to ritual enema scenes on ancient Maya pottery.
Gross.
The Physics Prize goes to Frank Fish et al. For trying to understand how ducklings manage to swim in formation.
Okay.
I'm a little interested in that one. I should have read that one, but
I mean, you still can.
yeah, they're still there. Just go to Ig Nobel's website. The Peace Prize goes to Junhee Wu for developing an algorithm to help gossipers decide when to tell the truth and when to lie.
An algorithm. Gossipers.
It's the future. AI is coming for us.
We don't need to help gossipers. I don't.
The Economics Prize goes to Alessandro Plucino, Alessio Emanuele Biondo, and Andrea Rapisarda for explaining mathematically why success most often goes not to the most talented people, but instead to the luckiest.
It's called nepotism.
It is. You're right. I didn't read the paper, but I believe it.
There's a lot of... Yeah, okay.
This is my favorite, and I'm so glad it was last on the list, because then I can end this with a really good punch. We have, finally here at the end, the Safety Engineering Prize, which goes to Magnus Gens, for developing a moose crash test dummy. You want one of those, don't you?
I do. Very much.
I have no questions for that one.
I just want a moose.
My theory, and someone out there can read this paper and tell me what the facts are here. My guess is that it was not to put in the car, but to put in front of the car.
I would assume, yeah.
But I want to believe very badly that they do try to put it in the car. If it's a convertible, how hard could it be, right?
Oh. I just want to know if there are what other animal crashed it. It's got to be in case something crashes into it.
I would think so, but I choose to believe otherwise.
Okay.
Well, congratulations to the winners this year. I like that we started by laughing. We didn't even get into the question.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we should move on. We have another question this week.
That's true.
Typically we have two, and this is no different.
How predictable.
You didn't have to be on.
According to your scheduling thing, you needed somebody.
That's true. You did have to be on. You're here now, deal with it.
Better than being in the past.
Question 2 this week. Say the human race is extinct in the distant future, and a new civilization is finding remnants of our past. What are the most likely things to last for archaeologists to find? So, broadly, that would drastically depend on what made the human race extinct. Fair. However, I'm going to argue Funko Pops. Oh, yeah. Yep, probably. Because they're made out of plastic and they're going to survive and they're going to be like, wow, these little items are their gods because they were displayed in prominent places in the home and feature different characters that are reoccurring in different houses. And there are billions of them. We had a pantheon.
And they had creepy eyes.
They do have creepy eyes.
That's irrelevant to the worship. They just do.
They just do. I'm not a big fan of Funko Pops. I don't know why.
Neither am I, but they're really prevalent, and they remind me of, in any museum, if you look at like home altar statues of any gods from like Greek to Egyptian to anything, they're very similar.
Like little like house fertility statues and stuff. Yeah. That I'm disappointed, but that's probably true. Well, you touched on something that is kind of similar to. I have a litany of follow-up questions to this, so I'll just rattle them off real quick right now. So where did this new civilization come from?
Mm-hmm.
Did society do a hard reset and start from hunter-gatherer again, or is it some already advanced civilization that is treating the entire planet as a ruin? Or are they localized to any specific region for some reason? And do any of those questions matter?
Yeah.
I think all of those questions matter. I don't think we have time to address all of them.
Fair enough.
The tricky part is that, like, when it comes to a lot of our construction, like, you know, things that are made of wood aren't going to last forever. Things that are made of stone are likely to last quite a while. I mean, look at Stonehenge, for example.
Maybe, but you say wood though, but then again, what was the disaster that wiped us out? Because stone or wood submerged in like mud or like a peat bog will become petrified and last a very long time. And if we have an incident where like the crust of the earth becomes like quicksand and just sucks these buildings down, like they're going to be preserved.
Right.
Fair enough.
I think a lot of things will be preserved at that point.
They sure will. Lucky future archaeologists.
So I guess one of the kind of more interesting parts of this that I've brought up is if we're wiped out and a new civilization discovers Earth, versus if society starts over, because I kind of would think if we have a new civilization, a new species that starts primitive and works its way up to being at least as advanced as we are now, they also probably would have discovered history piecemeal like we have.
True. I think it also depends, exactly like Anne said, like, was it a nuclear war that, you know, ruined a bunch of documents and like city centers and things like that, or I don't know, like a plague or something that left everything pretty much intact.
Right. Yeah, because if it's the thing that wiped out the dinosaurs, then a lot of stuff on the surface might just be gone.
Yeah. Earlier, Anne mentioned microplastics. Those are going to be around for a while.
Yeah.
All plastic things in some form, whether they are melted blobs from being like, you know, nuclear blasts or blown to smithereens, they'll be there somewhere.
So I don't know how valid this is in its entirety, but like there's definitely, for people who work on cars and like other mechanical things, like there's definitely this idea that, you know, in the 20s or something, things were built to last, and then later they started using cheaper products and cheaper materials to make things. So like while plastic will probably still be around forever, it may not be the construction that we used the plastic for.
Right.
So like we might not find, I don't know, a tool that we know exactly what it does. Like this thing screws in screws. And we might just find like a handle and be like, this might have been something that was used to bludgeon things.
So kind of on that note, if we're talking about plastic, I kind of look at it the way, you know, a lot of contemporary archaeologists would look at, we find pottery shards.
Okay.
Everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And like, if there's not residue or anything on it, if you find a tiny piece of pottery shard, you don't know if that was a pitcher or a plate or a tablet that was written or something like that. But it's like, they might be able to find context elsewhere.
Yeah.
To kind of put together what it might have been. But I think, it would be a case of like, we can't look at items by themselves. You'd have to think of like, what is there a lot of that they might be able to find context clues for?
That's fair. Another interesting point I thought of is even if they find some like sophisticated artifacts from our culture, they might not actually be able to determine like the extent of our technology from that.
Yeah.
The reason that I mention that is like we know that the ancient Egyptians, for example, had construction methods that allowed them to build the pyramids.
Mm-hmm.
And while we could probably build the pyramids today, what we don't actually know is what method they used.
Yeah. Yeah. We have some educated guesses, but,
So, kind of on that note, I'm going to throw out a general thing in that if we set aside what destroyed the civilization, right? Like, let's assume there wasn't so big of a disaster that things were just absolutely obliterated and there are, in fact, intact items.
Okay.
One thing that I think matters a lot if we're talking about today, right? Like, they're trying to look back on the society that is today, are the people who are doing the research, do they have access to or have an understanding of electricity?
Oh,
because
good point.
We have so many tech things that drive our society now. And like, are they going to be able to either access the cloud,
right,
or even like turn on a laptop or something? Or are they going to find all these corpses with these little squares in their pockets and be like, a weird talisman, throws it away,
Yeah.
I was going to say, because this gets into science fiction territory where we look at like ancient ancient artifacts being some lost technology. And that's kind of far-fetched. I mean, it's very far-fetched for the artifacts that we have, but like I can definitely see someone who has never seen a computer before look at a circuit board and think that's just some kind of art.
Yeah.
Right? So that actually, I want to bring in something that kind of exists as that equivalent.
Okay.
So I don't know if either of you have heard of this, or you might know what it is, but not by name. But the Antikythera mechanism.
Oh, okay.
So if you don't know what this is, it's an ancient Greek item. It was found, I believe, on a site of a shipwreck from antiquity. And there was a lot of mystery around this item because nobody knew what it was. Was it a piece of a bigger thing? And the general consensus today is that maybe it might be a very, very early form of an analog computer.
Interesting.
In that it was used to calculate astronomical positions pretty far in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that makes sense.
But when that was first discovered, it's like there was a bunch of theories about it. But then finally they realized, it was part of a process and not just this kind of elaborate looking item that was maybe just decoration. And I feel like we would encounter that exact same response to a lot of our things today.
I think that's totally fair because if you don't know how to, like, I can't look at a disassembled computer and know what anything's supposed to do. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of people can, but I'm not one of them.
Right? Yeah. And I mean, even simplifying it a little bit, I mean, if this society does not have the same timekeeping references as we do, even if they saw like an analog clock.
Yeah.
With all the gears and things inside, would they know what that was?
Ironically, I feel like I'm better qualified to take apart a computer than I am to take apart a watch.
Well, yeah, clockwork, but you know how to read a clock.
Yeah. Another thing that also matters is how far into the future are we looking?
Yeah.
Because a couple hundred years, I mean, I think that a lot of stuff is still going to be, even a couple thousand years. But if we're talking like, I don't know, 5 million years, 20 million years, I mean, we find a lot of fossils. We find a lot of things like, especially within the last 2 or 3 million years, we find a lot of tools and items that were used by, humans and human ancestors. But, I mean, the further back you go, the less that there's going to be. So if we're talking like 10 million years in the future and an alien archaeological team descends upon our world, they may not find a whole lot at all.
Well, they probably would be able to tell at least where, assuming they use, because we have no other baseline, right? So I'm assuming they kind of act like archaeologists of today. But they would probably be able to tell where the Anthropocene starts.
Yeah.
certainly if they did, geological surveys. So, like,
Sure.
they might be able to figure out, like, oh, okay, here's here. Then they're going to start seeing a lot more, like, steel remnants and, like, plastics and things. So,
Yeah,
like, oh, this is,
yeah.
like, the industrial age. So, like, they might not know what that is, but I bet they could probably put together, like, a thing happened here.
Right, yeah. I was reading about the plastics and how long they take to decompose. And, like, in a few million years, they will have decomposed, but they will decompose into hydrocarbons. And that would be, like you said, a very weird thing to find in a layer of soil. So, so even if it's not plastic, it's still going to be out of place. And that's something that they could look for.
It's also really important, even for our archaeologists, it's really important how information is recorded. Because, I mean, we've already covered, and we even talked about this when we talked about digital books. If a civilization can't read what is on a computer chip, then everything digital is basically lost.
Yeah.
But even so, a lot of what we know about ancient civilizations now is what we found in their writings, and this is why we really don't know that much about, like, South America, because all of their writings were lost. And we have a lot of European history, but there are things like, we know that steel was invented twice, basically, and the method to blacksmithing was at some point lost during the Dark Ages, and it was rediscovered later. Because it was not recorded anywhere. There are recipes for, like, cooking where they reference ingredients that are called by, like, a colloquial term, and we don't actually know what the recipe really calls for, and it might even be some extinct plant. There's a good YouTube channel called, I think, Cooking History, where a guy goes through old documents and tries to recreate, like, medieval and, like, ancient Roman dishes and stuff, which is pretty cool.
There's something that has been shared that it might have gone viral, or maybe it only went viral around History Dorks. But somebody pointed out that, like, if somebody doesn't understand what animals we have domesticated for food and reads in a cake mix that's like flour, milk, eggs, what eggs from which animal?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard that. Yeah, that's
right. So it's like, if you don't have context that, like, when we say eggs and ingredients, we specifically mean chicken eggs, they're going to be like, all right, 2 ostrich eggs in this egg. Here we go. Like,
well, and I mean, going on with, like, lost technology and stuff. Jim, you mentioned a while back, we don't actually know exactly how the Apollo spaceship was constructed, because they kept making adjustments to it.
Oh, right, yeah.
So, like, stuff like that, like, stuff that is, like, misrecorded, I guess.
Yeah, because they basically would make small tweaks that they wouldn't note on the plans because they just worked. So
another thing, and people cite the idea that history is written by the winners of conflicts a lot, and if archaeologists are diligent, and this is sort of how information is recorded. This is kind of the last point I wanted to make on that subject, because I think it's a fun story. John Smith of Pocahontas fame, that guy, pretty famously, and we figured this out, like, pretty shortly after he died. It didn't take very long, but he pretty famously wrote himself in a very heroic light in all of his writings. And it did not take long for people to investigate other accounts of what happened. So, like, sometimes, so yes, history is definitely recorded by the winners, but sometimes if you dig hard enough, you'll be able to see exactly that. Oh, these people tried to represent themselves a specific way.
Well, also, that's on an individual level.
Yeah.
But I think also, if we take that concept and start applying it to, what if the only history of like the 20th century that survives are all accounts from Russia?
Yeah.
How are the events of the Cold War going to be, skewed?
Yeah.
Because somebody like Stalin was very, very heavy on his propaganda. So, and that's a lot of that is what happened literally, as you mentioned, that we only have Western history. Right. We've seen that happen once already.
Well, we've also had throughout history tons of rewriting of discoveries and censorship of of historical findings too. So who's to say that wouldn't continue to happen in a different society?
Right.
This has gotten more dystopian than I expected it to be, but
so I can take us out of dystopia unless anybody has anything more to say on the subject.
I don't like it.
I don't have
here.
anything to say about dystopia. No.
I don't like it here. So something about this question that I wanted to have a little fun with is also that, you know, we're looking at it of like, we know what all of the things in our world generally kind of represent because we're living it.
Right.
But something I thought what might be fun is how, because archaeologists do this too, a lot of times like they're guessing, right? They're using context clues and trying to figure out what things are for. But like, they also, because humans have tendency to see patterns where there aren't any. And if we assume that this, you know,
I've noticed that about humans.
Right? So if we assume this future society has that same trend, I'm curious what we think they might discover and like wildly misinterpret from it. For example, something like there is a place, it's called colloquially like Japan's Atlantis.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. I want to go scuba diving there.
Yeah, it's called the Yoniguni Monument, and what it is a naturally occurring like rock formation. But the way the rock has broken off, it looks like it's been carved. It's very flat. It has like steps, which is why some people believe that it was man-made.
Okay.
But so I'm kind of curious about like what do you think occurred naturally that people are going to be like, aha, this is where a city was? Or like, you know, like, are they going to find remnants of the bodies of climbers on Mount Everest and be like, clearly there was a beautiful civilization at the top of this mountain, you know, like.
That would be interesting though. Cause like another thing that we would find, like, cause they would be well preserved, but then also like, I think most of them have like plastic climbing gear and plastic backpacks and plastic jackets, you know, the really nice, like insulated with the plastic. It's interesting to just think about how much plastic there would be up there.
There is, and there's a lot of like camp residue, but like would that not, if those survive because of the conditions and like, you know, stasis as we've discussed. Like, would somebody not find that there and be like, yes, there was a nomadic people that lived on tops of mountains.
Depends how many they find,
you know,
I guess.
And depending on what color, decided what like group they belonged to. If we found them in a red jacket versus a blue jacket, you know, like what kind of assumptions might be made there?
Was there some kind of religious significance to climbing to the top of this mountain and looking out upon the world or something like that?
Interesting.
I mean, some of the climbers might argue that there is religious significance to it, but
True.
I'm just saying it's like that's a visit. Nobody lives up there.
Right.
I actually was looking into a couple other things that might survive a long time. If the lunar debris, like the lunar modules and landers and whatnot in the rover, if they don't get hit by meteors at some point, they will last a very, very long time up there on the moon. Any satellites that are on stable orbits that, you know, won't get pulled in by somebody else's gravity or by our own gravity, those will last for a very long time. Voyager 1 and 2 are leaving the solar system, but I've heard estimates, like high-end estimates, that they might last for just 1 billion years unless they get hit by an asteroid, which is very unlikely in interstellar space.
Is that because there's no oxygen?
Yeah, basically, they can't really rust or decompose or anything like that because they're just in a vacuum. So, of course, they won't be functional, but and the gold plate in, I think, both Voyagers, the gold plate being gold is inert, so it's just gonna, you know, last forever and ever, basically.
So, out of curiosity, what about those things do you think would lead a future society to associate them with our Earth at all?
A lot of them maybe not, but some of the ones that we knew were going to end up in interstellar space, like Voyager, they have it's a record, which I don't know how they'd figure out how to play a record, but it also has etching on it that shows like it's a very like pixelated art, but it shows, you know, what a person looks like. It shows, theoretically, they could probably deduce where Earth is because there's a map that uses pulsars as basically GPS signals. It shows like the Earth's relative position compared to these pulsars.
Oh, okay.
It shows that Earth is the third planet from our star out of, it might be 9 because we didn't demote Pluto, but they'll figure it out. It's fine. They'll make it work.
Well, there's also that other one. Is it Ceres? Is that?
Oh,
man,
yeah,
that,
Ceres.
That would be so interesting, though, because like if they have different requirements to be
Right.
planets too, there would be this like great academic debate where like
Yeah.
some scholars are like, no, this civilization was on Venus. How dare you?
Clearly,
Like-
it was
Right,
this solar
yeah.
system they were referring to. But there are
Yeah.
no habitable planets in that solar system. Nonsense. This was 1,000,000 years ago.
Yeah, it
Right.
might have been habitable back then.
Oh, the scholars would be so mad.
The other two things that I saw that will last a very long time are glass. One of them is
Ooh.
glass, because glass is just silica. So glass doesn't really like decompose in a way. I mean, it breaks down over long periods of time, but there being like a layer of glass in our soil, like a layer of hydrocarbons or plastic or whatever, that would be maybe a clue that somebody was deliberately making glass. The other thing that I thought was really, really interesting is the idea of a cut diamond, because diamonds are already a billion years old. So diamonds last forever. Like, diamonds are forever. So if someone came along and started finding a bunch of cut diamonds, they'd be like, well, someone had to have done this on purpose because diamonds don't cut themselves.
So interesting too, because I wonder if they would be able to tell the difference between actual diamonds and lab-made diamonds, because like,
Well, and going back to your, context matters. Would they realize that we had a discernible difference between them?
mhm.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Derek's point is interesting too, because again, we're looking at it as if they are archaeologists.
Yeah.
So it's not just that they're finding that there are cut diamonds, but they would immediately be like, but why?
Yeah.
Well,
So it kinda-
would they notice that like certain burial sites of people have more authentic diamonds, and maybe they might be able to determine this is a more aristocratic area of our society?
they
or
would
something.
find the British crown
They would
jewels
find-
and
yeah.
be like,
Right.
clearly this was the war helm of the leader, and they
Yeah.
covered it with diamonds to make it solid.
And we've found this odd hat in Buckingham Cave.
The thing that I thought was just most interesting about that, though, was like, if someone came along in like 800 million years after basically the whole Earth's surface has been, recycled completely, and they found some cut diamonds, they'd be able to be like, oh, there must have been somebody who could cut diamonds.
Yeah.
Which I think is just kind of cool. Like that would be.
Here's something that I remembered I wanted to mention. I forgot to write it down though. But so we know that dinosaurs weren't all like, they were hundreds of thousands of years separated, right?
Mm-hmm.
But laymen tend to think dinosaurs were just in dinosaur times.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, because humanity has not been around nearly as long as that.
Mhm.
We are a very small blip on the calendar.
We are a very
Yeah.
small blip on the I wonder how much, depending on like what region you study, you might think, because you already have people, like I've met people today that think feudal Japan was basically at the same time as Richard the Lionheart, right? Maybe not feudal Japan, but
I lack all the context that is necessary for that comparison.
oh, okay. Well, so like the
Like, I
height,
don't know when either of those things happened. Like I
So
know feudal
we-
Japan is
Feudal Japan was
Yeah.
later than people think it is. It wasn't like ancient.
like 200 years ago, right?
It's rather contemporary.
yeah. What
Yeah.
I'm saying, there were firearms in existence during the height of what we think of our samurai times,
Right.
but people
Right.
tend to think that's medieval, like at the same
Oh,
time
yeah,
as
yeah,
like the 1300s, the 1100s in Europe.
Mm.
So I have a note here that I kind of want to tie that into.
Okay.
I think definitely the further out these people get, the more every human timeline would just condense.
I mean, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. So assuming they're coming back a little closer to this mass extinction event, right? So in that there are still literal like natural things still in existence, like they can find remnants of clothing
Mhm.
Okay.
specifically. I think newer eras, like the last several decades, would just really mess with them. And here's why. So the idea of like thrifting and vintage is relatively new. And I don't mean in the sense that people absolutely always reuse stuff. But they had the tendency to either like remake it and update it, or like the fashions didn't change as quick as they do now.
Right.
So if you were looking at it from the perspective of like a dress historian, and you look at somebody from 2022 who has a closet full of things from the 1920s because they like that style.
Yeah.
Also, maybe they do some Civil War reenacting, so there's a couple like accurate hoop skirts in there. And then there's something from like, you know, Sheen or however you say the cheap with lead in it. Right? So like they're looking at this all in one spot. And they're like, at what point would you have to be like, this person lived for 300 years? Like...
I think the invention of theater was just a huge practical joke on any future civilization.
I'm excited for the time when someone opens a vault and it's just cosplay costumes.
But that's kind of my point, is that if they look at modern years, like very contemporary years, in comparison to the way fashion changes slowly over the last couple, because it's like, oh, okay, I can kind of put this in this 100-year period based on the outfits. And then it switches to like the Industrial Revolution and kind of the advent of, you know, shopping malls and fast fashion, at least in the Western world. You know, styles start changing way quicker.
Yeah.
So you're going to start thinking that those, if you're comparing it to earlier times, every time a style changes, like, you know, from the 1950s through now, we've had a lot of different distinct looks. But they're going to think each of those decades was like 100 years.
Very possibly.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that would like mess with people.
Right.
Another thing that's somewhat related to that I was going to suggest this a while back when we talked about studying like more ancient civilizations, but like, I guess it was when Funko Pops became our deities. I don't know. But I was thinking a lot of times we don't really know cause and effect, which is which, when we're studying. So like a lot of things that were like fashion statements in ancient Greece, for example, may have been a religious practice, or they may have been inspired by a religious practice, and we don't know which came first. And Jim's point of like cosplaying, like depending on how much access you have to our media, you can see our art, you can see like television shows and stuff. But
so
like,
you're saying that's like ceremonial garb where people dress up like their gods that they have tiny figures of in their houses?
Yeah, what I'm saying is, do you know that people are dressing in costumes of the TV shows, or do you think maybe the TV shows were made based on what people wore?
So okay, this might be getting too deep.
Welcome to the show.
But if we are comparing that to like, okay, our cosplays, like, would they think of them as religious practices? Then here's the question, though, of like, how much of media in general would seem like religious beliefs to somebody pretty far removed from it?
Okay.
Because the idea of like entertainment for entertainment isn't super separate, because like look at like Greek plays, right? Like that's you know, mass media of the time, but a lot of times they're addressing stories of the gods, of morality tales,
right,
which are kind of integrated with their religion. So it's like, is somebody gonna watch Star Wars and be like, and here's what it can tell us about the beliefs of this period, you know? And they wouldn't necessarily be wrong.
Well, a lot of our fiction is based on like the fact that the narrative arc focuses on good versus evil and the growth of the protagonist most of the time.
Like that is essentially like a morality play.
That's what makes it interesting to us, right? But that kind of gets to another angle of something I tried to articulate, I guess, but like how many of these ceremonial gowns or jewelry or something that we think were really important to the culture are actually just fun. And they just liked them.
Yeah, yeah. It would be interesting to see like an alien archaeologist who maybe doesn't have a concept of fun.
I don't think it would be fun to see someone who doesn't.
I mean, honestly, I kind of think that's our archaeologists now, because very rarely are they going to look at something and be like, they did it just because it has to have meaning.
Calling you out, Allie.
No, Allie knows about a good time in ancient Rome, believe me.
Well, but we know about good times in ancient Rome because like we literally have like mosaics
Yeah.
and like graffiti
Right.
of the people telling us we're here for a good time, not a long time. # Pompeii. But like,
I mean, they had Dionysus in ancient.
Oh, right,
Greece,
yeah.
So like
you know, but like if you didn't have the writings from it,
Dionysus, the god of just not taking anything too seriously.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it would be interesting. Also, I think it would be interesting too if we're talking about like the writings of people, like what, now a lot of our history comes from even comparatively, modern history comes from like journals of famous figures.
Sure.
And also just, journals of any old person that gives us a good sense of like what life was like at the time.
Like John Smith.
Right? But like also it's another case of like if they find some of these like realistic fiction books that are written, from a certain perspective, are they going to think
like historical
that's
fiction?
somebody, like, are they going to think that that's like somebody's account of it?
Like if they find a James Bond novel, or they're like,
And
oh,
like,
James
yes,
Bond, this guy, he was
their
cool.
great hero, James Bond.
Yeah.
Like,
Did Robin Hood exist or not?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I think that would also open up some interesting implications because it's like, what's like the Bible is a copy of a book that most people have in their houses, but like think of like bestsellers that people are
Right.
going to be like, their other Bible. Yes, of course.
Yeah,
The Twilight novels, their other Bible.
I think, yeah.
I don't own a copy of the Twilight novels, but I assume a lot of people do. Or
Yeah.
like the Harry Potter books,
The Harry
right?
Potter
Like,
books.
Oh, yeah,
Lord
yeah.
of the Rings would be a big one, probably.
yeah, like all these fictional stories, but like are kind of set in like a like would someone read Tolkien and be like, this is their history?
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
man.
interesting.
Oh, man. He'd be so thrilled.
He would be so proud.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because, like, if you know enough about, human society to be like, oh, well, this is, a fictitious account of something that happened, or like it's symbolism
Right.
for something that happened, or that's so interesting.
It's such a. This is another topic, I think. So
Yeah.
Going all the way back into things like just random things that they will find and maybe assume the wrong things from. I just think it would be interesting to see what they thought of lawnmowers and weed whackers and give me a minute, I'm going somewhere.
Okay.
We have a lot of agricultural tools, right, throughout
Yeah.
history in general.
Yeah.
And I cannot think of a single one in our like archaeology that is not directly related to like what people are cultivating to sell, whether it's like, eventually going to be turned into like cotton for clothes or, wheat for food. But very recently, again, in the grand scheme of history,
Yeah.
have we started keeping like our lawns for aesthetic purposes and no other reason.
Oh.
So are they going to think that in like suburban America, grass was a staple crop?
Oh.
We were just talking about this at my house earlier today. The point of mowing the lawn. And, that's fantastic.
That's really interesting. I never thought about that.
No, I love that. That's great. Well, listeners, this week, let us know what process similar to carbon dating will we use to see what society was like after humanity is extinct.
Radioactive.
Was that, radioactive? That was too on the nose, maybe. Jim, do we have any listener mail?
Oh man, that would suck if you were an archaeologist and found an unexploded hydrogen bomb.
Oh, no. Wait, it's not the plot to Beneath the Planet of the Apes?
Is it?
Is it?
I mean,
I
not
don't
exactly.
know.
They
I
weren't
know that-
archaeologists.
I know that happens in Fallout. There's like a whole town built around an unexploded.
Yeah, I think
atomic
that's a
bomb.
reference to Beneath the Planet of the Apes because
Okay.
it's this group of humans that survived the ape apocalypse. I don't know what you call it. And they worship an unexploded nuclear bomb.
The ape apocalypse. Oh, that would be it then, yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't know that.
It's not a very good movie.
I didn't know that's where that was from, but it sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Sorry, I sidetracked it.
Oh, Jim, do we have any listener mail?
We do. And as always, if you want to send us listener mail, you can email us at feedback@vaguelyscientific.com. You can comment on our blog. You can like us on Facebook. You can tweet at vaguelysci. And today we actually have a special treat because this one just comes to us from my wife. So,
Yay!
She thought it was really interesting. We were talking about cryptid hospitals. So she sent in, good afternoon/evening/day, gents. In episode 104, you talked about what a cryptid hospital would look like. I wanted to write in and let you know that a writer has created such a thing. In Shauna Maguire's Encrypted series, which follows the exploits of a family who are cryptid preservationists, they often end up at one in New York City called St. Giles. Interesting points about this hospital. It was built under St. Catherine's Hospital so they can share resources without regular folks knowing about it. Cryptids such as hide-behinds actually bespell entrances so people are not as likely to look/see them. And they keep a type of cryptid known as a caladrius. Caladrius? I'm going to have to ask her about that. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure the hospital is St. Giles while we're at it.
Oh, you're probably right.
Yeah, I was going to say that, but we moved on.
Folks with, but these caladriuses are folks with wings that have healing properties to deal with beyond technology issues. She goes in depth with more details about the hospital in the book and when characters necessitate a visit, but I thought it would be interesting to let you know such a thing has been fully conceptualized by someone.
That's interesting because there's definitely at least 2 examples that I was trying to remember and still haven't, and this is not one of those. So more fiction out there.
So at least 3.
At least 3, 1 verified.
Yeah. Sometimes I like if it's something that I know she knows a lot about. Like she knows way more about Tolkien than I do because I've only seen Two Towers as a movie one time. But like sometimes I'll ask her questions that are going to be in the show and get like ideas and stuff. But I didn't even think to ask her about this. And that's why I ended up getting an email from her. So thank you very much for that. And if you have a question that needs to be answered in a vaguely scientific manner, please email us at questions@vaguelyscientific.com. If you want to get our episodes the minute that they're released, you can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and all the other great places the cool podcasts hang out. And subscribing and leaving feedback really helps us out, and so does telling your friends.
And the more friends you tell, the more likely it is that a future civilization will discover this show.
Yeah. And speaking of which, don't forget to check out our merch store over at vaguelyscientific.threadless.com because the thing is, if humanity goes extinct and all the servers in the world get wiped, no one's going to know about Vaguely Scientific. But if you buy a mug or a shirt or something that has our logo on it, then they'll know.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Important
Jim,
work we're doing here.
Your skateboard advocation will finally be justified.
Yeah.
What? They have these weird boards with wheels attached to them, and they all say vaguely. What is this about frogs being badly shaped? That's
The cult of the goodly shaped frog.
Yeah.
It's not a cult, it's the correct side.
Oh, yes.
Well, thank you to Anne for being our guest this week.
Mm-hmm.
You're welcome.
Yay! For Vaguely Scientific, I am Derek.
I'm Jim.
I'm Anne.
Vaguely Scientific is not affiliated with Murderbots or any Murderbot subsidiaries.
Toodaloo, everyone. That's funny because the thing happened with the time travel.
Yeah, that was the reference I was alluding to.
And that was 7 episodes ago.
Yeah, which feels like a million years.
It sure does.
Oh,